The process of writing poetry becomes a healing process not only for Keats but also for Shelley and Coleridge. The use of imagination, to evade depression and connect with a higher dimension, is one of the main topics. Keats is focused on the power of art, instead of politics. For him, nature was a mediator in this experience. He is the youngest and died when he was 25 years old from a genetic disease. He became an orphan when he was 14, so he had to depend on benefactors. There was a lot of pain and suffering, and Keats as a doctor was very empathic with other human beings. So he believed that poetry could be better to heal than medicine. In fact, he studied the soul like anatomists studied the body. He was, however, very sensitive and enjoyed trivial, ordinary day-to-day moments. He was very talented in poetry and he was Shelley's idol. In fact, they identified Shelley's corpse because he had Keats's book. In his letters, he expresses that everything should come naturally. Nature is the organizing principle. He considered his duty to be able to express what he felt through the five senses, to transmit his perception and transmitted reality in a vivid way. He was a visionary and technically gifted and portrayed death as something wonderful. This is because of the dualism of death. It can be hard and painful, but to appreciate the wonders of day-to-day death is necessary. He found meaning in art instead of through religion, and also believed in transcendence through art, as it connected us with a higher reality to where we belonged.
In this poem, we can see the power of imagination. In Ode to a Nightingale, one of the main themes is that the artistic experience takes us beyond ourselves to another reality. He puts art in the place of religion and nature as a vehicle to reach that experience. This poem is definitely romantic because of the influence of the power of nature. He also underlines the power of art, which is connected with a higher dimension. He talks about vision and dreams, which are definitely personal, subjective, and romantic. The poetic eye is key. It is a personal experience and uses references to all the senses, recreates smells, sounds, textures. We have very strong emotions in the poem. Both dimensions are described in the poem by using imagery related to nature. In fact, nature is the element that will put us in contact with another reality. The author feels overwhelmed, so we can see the idea of the sublime related to nature. The Nightingale is related to escape, as Keats wanted to evade the hard reality he had to live. The Nightingale definitely represents nature, art, inspiration, ecstasies. The Nightingale represents the idea of merging with nature to reach another higher dimension. As the Nightingale seems to belong to an immortal reality, although we can hear it. This poem is divided into 8 stanzas, although we could divide it into 3 main parts. The first one would be till stanza 4, and in this part, he talks about the power of the Nightingale's song and speculates how to be close to the source. At first he tries through alcohol, but then he reaches the conclusion that art is a more powerful tool. In the second part of the poem, from stanzas 4 to 7, he talks about the effects of imagination and his experience in this higher dimension. This dimension is ruled by imagination, so senses are not supposed to work, but for Keats, this higher reality is so strong that he uses the 5 senses to describe it. It is a reality without pain and suffering. Finally, the 8th stanza is the last part, where he is confused about the experience he has lived. Analyzing the poem in depth, in the first stanza he mentions that his heart aches. It is in pain, but it does not have to be bad. He feels as if he had drunk hemlock, the poison that Socrates had to drink for his revolutionary ideas. He also makes a reference to Lethe, the river of the world of death in ancient Greek mythology, which was supposed to make people lose their memory, to explain how he feels at this moment. Then he mentions that he feels too overwhelmed to hear the Nightingale's song, but being too happy in thine happiness. The idea of being overwhelmed by nature is directly connected to the idea of the sublime. He refers to the nightingale as a light-winged dryad of the trees, which is a reference to classic mythology to underline the idea that the nightingale belongs to a higher dimension. Moreover, in the second stanza, he talks about the power of alcohol, wine, to stay closer to the nightingale. That I might drink, and leave the world unseen, and with thee fade away into the forest dim dash. As alcohol has the faculty to transport people to other places, he even compares alcohol with Hippocrene, a river that was considered to be sacred. Furthermore, in the third stanza, he describes the harsh reality he had to live, always surrounded by sickness and death, where palsy shakes a few, sad, last, gray hairs, where youth grows pale, and spectre thin, and dies. He ends the stanza by making references to the death and sickness of his family, where beauty cannot keep her lustrous eyes, and also expresses the idea that he knew that his time left in this reality with his beloved was short. This is why he ends the stanza with, "Beyond tomorrow." In the fourth stanza, which concludes the first part, he mentions that the power of poetry to stimulate imagination and lead us to a higher reality is even more powerful than wine. To refer to the wine, he talks about Bacchus, who was the god of wine. "I will fly to thee, not chariot by Bacchus and his parts, but on the viewless wings of poesy." By using the word viewless, he implies that poetry as well as the nightingale belong to a higher dimension which can only be seen through imagination. I have the impression that then compares both dimensions by making an analogy of the sky, the higher reality full of light, and happily the queen moon is on her throne, clustered around by all her starry fays, and the earth, the harsh and almost dark reality where he lives, but here there is no light, save what from heaven is with the breezes blown, through verdurous glooms and winding mossy ways. When analyzing the fifth stanza, he mentions that he cannot see in this high dimension and that it is an embalmed darkness. He wants to express that in this high reality senses do not work, but imagination does. He uses nature to describe this dimension, the grass, the thicket, and the fruit tree wild white hawthorn, and the pastoral eglantine, fast fading violets covered up in leaves. He even makes a personification of May, May's eldest child, which is the time of the year when we have more nature. However, he describes this reality through senses and makes references to smell, each sweet. Moreover, the sixth stanza describes this high dimension as a place without pain, with no pain, and a place where he feels great, in such an ecstasy. He also makes a reference to senses at the beginning, "Darkling I listen." Apart from this, he feels that he would like to die in this reality without pain, seems it rich to die. He knows that he will die soon and has always been surrounded by death. "I have been half in love with easeful death." Finally, the seventh stanza, which is the last stanza of the second part, it deals with the duality regarding mortality. He mentions that humans are all going to die, by emperor and clown. The nightingale, on the other hand, is represented as an immortal creature. To justify this, he mentions that his song has been heard by humans for thousands of years. He mentions that Ruth, which is a biblical reference to a woman who was exiled and longed for her home, a melancholic reference, could have heard it. He also expresses the power of that music and art to open other realities, opening on the phone. He ends by saying that the same music that he or Ruth heard can also be heard in imaginary lands, the same that oft-timed hath charmed magic casements, in fairy lands forlorn. So the nightingale is presented as a creature belonging to another reality. To conclude, analyzing the last stanza, he feels confused about the experience lived. This is why he ends the poem with the questions: was it a vision, or a waking dream? Fled is that music, do I wake or sleep? He starts the stanza by making reference to the word forlorn, which is the same one he used to end the seventh stanza. This word is related to loneliness, so he feels abandoned to my soul self. He even questions if the nightingale could have been a deceiving elf, another mythological creature which could have made the author have this vision. He feels melancholic about the experience lived. So each reader can have their own interpretation if it is a sad or happy ending.